When we hear the words ghost ship, what we usually imagine is an abandoned ship with torn sails somewhere far out in the ocean. But sometimes these ships get thrown ashore where they stay forever, getting gradually covered with sand. But what can we say about ships that are sometimes found in the middle of a desert? Legends about these ships have been circling around the world for at least several centuries, while none of the eyewitnesses could ever understand how the ships ended up there. The U.S. state of California got especially many reports of mysterious medieval wooden ships found in the middle of the desert in the 19th and early 20th centuries. Those ships were often discovered by Native Americans, and sometimes they even had treasure inside of them. The main theory claims that all those ships had once sailed the seas, but then got stuck in the shallow waters. Eventually, the sea shrank under the influence of climate change, and the ships ended up buried in the sands. And those ships do actually exist. You can still see the abandoned ships in the dried-up Aral Sea, in the Aralcombe Desert, the famous ship graveyard. These ships are fading away under the scorching sun. The Aral Sea shrank hundreds of kilometers from Moynac, leaving only rusty ships and boats in memory of itself. In the Namib Desert, you can see the wreck of the German ship Edward Bolen, which got into a dense fog and ran aground off of the Skeleton Coast in September 1909. In 2008, one of the diamond mining companies drained a salt lake that was once a sea lagoon on the coast of Namibia. At the bottom of the lake, they found the wreckage of several ships. They were parts of a wooden ship about 500 years old among all the remains. Its holds were filled with treasures, gold and silver coins, copper ingots with manufacturers' marks on them, medieval weapons, elephant tusks. The ship that found its last harbor off of the coast of Namibia was identified as the Portuguese ship Bom Jesus, or Good Jesus. In March 1533, the ship left Lisbon and headed for one of the ports of India, but it never reached its destination. The specialists estimated the total cost of the cargo at $13 million. The treasure legally belonged to the government of Namibia. But how does one explain the existence of ships in the deserts where there has never been a sea or an ocean? The ufologists have a theory that such ships could be victims of alien abduction, for example, in the Bermuda Triangle. This theory is so popular that at one time it even got into the Steven Spielberg movie Close Encounters of the Third Kind in 1977. The most famous place in the United States where mysterious ships are often found is the Colorado Desert in California. Over the past 2 centuries, there were also reports of abandoned ships and sightings coming from the Sonoran Desert in the states of California and Arizona. The reports claimed that the sailboats seemed to have appeared on the desert rocks as if out of nowhere. The local Native Americans discovered those ships and described them as abandoned, withered by the sun, and half buried in the sand. However, according to their descriptions, one could easily recognize, for example, the Spanish galleons of the Middle Ages or Viking ships. Sometimes, the Native Americans dared to climb inside the wrecked ships and even found treasures there. Those stories about the treasures and the ghost ships of the desert weren't only told by some adventure seekers, but also by far more reliable witnesses. One such story dates back to 1862. After a severe flood caused by the flooding of the Colorado River, the locals discovered an old ship in the desert near Dos Palmas, California. It was partially buried in the sand and looked somewhat like a Spanish galleon. The waters of the Colorado River washed away the sand and exposed the ship, which apparently was hidden in those sands for at least several hundred years. Many people came to see the ship from afar as it was perfectly visible from the nearest hill. However, when a group of specialists arrived to study the ship a little later, they couldn't find it. They assumed that the ship was hidden by the waters of the Salt Lake Salton Sea, which dries up regularly, but then fills with water again. That's why it's virtually impossible to carry out any excavations in that area. There's another legend that a lot of people believe to be true. It's about a ship with gold and pearls that was allegedly found in the California desert. In 1870, a man named Charlie Klusker and his friends were told by Native Americans about the wreckage of a large sailing ship. According to their description, it was located in Dos Palmas, but on the other side of the Salton Sea. Klusker and his friends went over the area several times and searched for the ship until they finally found it. Klusker described the ship as an ornate Spanish galleon carrying many luxuries. Planning on getting all the treasures out of the ship, they returned to the city and prepared wagons with mules. This discovery was even described in the Los Angeles Star newspaper. Unfortunately, there was no information about what happened with the Klusker team next. It's as if they simply disappeared into the sands. However, according to the stories the locals share, a certain Native American man used very expensive pearls to pay for food and drinks at one of the shops in the town of Borrego Springs in California at the beginning of the 20th century. When he was asked where he got the pearls, he said that there was a strange wooden building in the desert, half buried in the sand and full of pearls. Ever since then, various adventurers have heard the story of the Spanish galleon full of gold and pearls lost somewhere in the desert. Some of them have gone out in search of the abandoned ship, but none of the expeditions have ever been able to find the ghost ship. And even more so, some of them have disappeared themselves. I suppose the mystery of the ships found in the desert can only be explained by the so-called time storms, the breaks in the space-time continuum. The so-called time loop, the phenomenon when people and things from the past are transferred to the future in some incomprehensible way, is the most mysterious phenomenon of the concept of time. An expert in the field of anomalous phenomena, Jenny Randles, in her book Time Storms, showed evidence of anomalous phenomena that occurred in various parts of the world and helped her create a description of the so-called time storms. Randles believes that time storms are a phenomenon with a very stable set of characteristics, which are connected with energy fields that provoke fractures in the space-time continuum, and thus have incredible possibilities. The question remains, what causes these phenomena? Maybe some kind of natural perturbation leads to a disruption of time and takes the form of a miniature black hole. Or maybe these events are the byproducts of scientific research into the use of electromagnetic fields. The time storms described by Jenny Randles appear to be able to alter gravity, move objects around in space, and even make time travel possible. One of the main elements of science fiction, known as teleportation, is one of the unusual features of the time storm. But the most unusual aspect of the time storm is a kind of distortion of time. From a scientific point of view, time travel is possible. However, this idea can't just be dismissed. After all, it's been suggested that the medieval ships lost in the middle of the deserts could have ended up there as a result of the time storms, although it does sound rather unrealistic.